You're listening to Emmy Award-winning host Jordan J. Adams.
I recently emceed Microdose Wonderland, billed as the largest psychedelic medicine business event ever. It was coincidental, but timed perfectly with my current vetting of plant medicine as a possible comrade in my quest to clear my foggy and sluggish brain. The conference was a bountiful harvest of the exact kind of people I want to meet. Ballers. People who are killing it in the world and know way more than I do on how to recover health, mental performance, and well-being. One of the standouts, amongst a group of standouts, is here with me today. Josiah Hesse is a freelance journalist in Denver, Colorado. He writes about politics, marijuana, and evangelical culture and theology, and is a regular contributor to The Guardian and Vice. His work has appeared in Esquire, and he's had bylines in Politico, High Times, and the Denver Post. He's currently the senior editor of the Denver Arts and Literature magazine, Suspect Press. Josiah Hesse, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Last time I saw you was at Microdose Wonderland in Miami, a wonderful conference on psychedelic medicine. And I didn't have a chance to ask you yet, how was the conference for you?
It was a wild ride. I had no idea that the psychedelic industry was as far along as it appears to be. It's not exactly where the cannabis industry is, but at one point somebody handed me a little tin of psilocybin gummies and it looked like something that just came out of a dispensary, and I really couldn't believe it. I had no idea that these products were out there. So, and I met some great people. There were some fascinating conversations that came out of it. I had an article that came out in The Guardian earlier this week reflecting on that conference and the kind of culture clash that's going on between the more idealistic hippie side of the movement and the big business CEO types. So it was a lot of fun all around.
I need to write for The Guardian or for Vice. No one gave me any free swag. Especially I didn't get any psilocybin gummies. I got a bunch of paperwork, but that was about all I got. You've written this wonderful book, A Runner's High, How a Movement of Cannabis-Fueled Athletes is Changing the Science of Sport. And there you see, I gotta try and get the bottom in there with that there. Josiah Hesse. It's a nice cover when it's not.
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic that the cover is going psychedelic on us.
I fought for the stars at the top.
Yeah. It is a wonderful read. I get to read a fair amount of books on health and listen to hundreds, if not thousands, of podcasts on health. I have to say it's a real treat, Josiah, to read a book that's written by an investigative journalist, because it's different than reading a traditional health book that's usually written by the scientist, him or herself. When it's well written, with this professionally written narrative with humor, context, and insight, it was much easier for me to grasp the more difficult science because it was kind of in metaphoric, prose. Really nice read.
Thank you. If you'll hold for just 1 second, I'm going to close the curtain on my office. The sun decided to make a cameo and right in my eyes.
I can see that.
There,
we should play a little better. Beatles there. A little Here Comes the Sun.
Yeah, my main objective with writing that book, in addition to wanting to unpack the science and educate people on what was really going on with cannabis and athletics, was really just to write a fun read, something that people could enjoy picking up after they put it down the night before. And I think often with science or any esoteric topic that people don't know about, and I'm sure this book appeals to like people in athletics that don't know anything about cannabis, or people in cannabis who don't know anything about athletics or the science. There's a lot of pitfalls to going overboard with the information or presenting it in a way that just kind of makes people gloss over and can't really absorb it. And if you're not getting the information, if you're not presenting it in an accessible way, you're really not presenting it at all. You might as well have not written a book, because it's not really getting into anyone's head. So that was a fun challenge to, take things like the endocannabinoid system or the variety of regulations around cannabis in sports, and present them in some sort of accessible, fun way.
Yeah, that to me, it's such a double win because I really need the science, for my own personal health quest. And yet, I really drift off. Part of the reason I'm on such a health quest is I'm trying to get some function back, in terms of my brain capabilities. And so a real heavy scientific text is something I have to read because I'm trying to save my own brain. But boy, thank you for making it accessible, such a scientific topic. And I'm laughing throughout, chapter after chapter, infused with humor. We'll talk about the carrot cake fiasco later on, but it's infused with wonderful humor. And so it just made it, I couldn't put it down. It was great. And, it was really amazing to me. And you had mentioned this in your book, that's such an interesting topic because, there's a fair amount of us who love to exercise, and there's a ton of us who love to get high. Such an interesting hybrid that has never really been talked about or dealt with. And you said when you originally went to look for research on it, you couldn't find much, that no one really had done a deep dive on the subject yet. Why do you think such a fascinating topic fell through the cracks?
Well, I think if you look at the history of research around cannabis, particularly after the Nixon administration, or even worse after Reagan, it was all geared towards the negative. The only way to get a study funded, to get approval from the DEA to use their terrible cannabis, which was all you could use. You can't use anything that's grown in the black market or later on in the legal market. It was all going to be geared toward, how is this dangerous for children? How does this make you lazy? How does this make you stupid? So there were so much politics that had infused the research. And that's true about the war on drugs across the board, not just with cannabis. People like Carl Hart are speaking out about that, and that's really changing now. And I think for the longest time, most people didn't know how prevalent cannabis use was in athletics, including the people who were using it. Again and again throughout the process of doing interviews for this book, I met people who thought that they were the only ones who used cannabis, and they were very secretive about it. And so it was something that remained underground by default, not because it wasn't very popular, but because nobody knew how popular that it was. The people competing or training while they were high were often doing it next to other people who were high, but they had no idea because everyone was keeping it to themselves. And with legalization, you started to see more and more people admitting that they've been using cannabis a long time. Sometimes people were getting caught, like Michael Phelps or later on Sha'Carri Richardson. And so it just, we've slowly begun to realize, oh, this is very, very prevalent. And just before I started writing the book, there were a number of people in all avenues of sports saying 60, 80, 90% of everyone in their sport is using cannabis in one way or another, before, during, or after their training, sometimes in competition. And as most of us know, that's banned. So it's something that when I got into it, I couldn't resist the opportunity to report on something that was so prevalent yet so underreported. And it's interesting that fell into my lap because before this, I've been a journalist for a very long time, but I'd never touched sports in any way. Never really had a great interest in sports. I didn't participate in sports in school. As I say in the book, throughout my 20s, I didn't exercise, or at least not consciously, maybe ride my bike here and there, going out dancing. But when I was about 29 or 30, I started getting into running for the mental health benefits, and really hated it, thought it was boring and painful. And then I tried it with edibles, and it was a complete game changer. It was so much fun and easy that it became the centerpiece of my week, or my day a lot of the time. I couldn't wait to finish work and go for a run. It was my treat at the end of the day. It was something I rewarded myself with. It wasn't by any means a discipline that I was pursuing, and I wasn't doing it with any sort of goals in mind. I was hardly ever measuring my pace or distance or time or anything. So when I started writing about it first for The Guardian and then for Esquire, this intersection of first just runners who were using cannabis, ultramarathon runners, doing 100, 200-mile races through the mountains. It just, I thought, I kept thinking, surely there's someone else who would be better suited to report on this. But I loved running high so much that I knew I could write about it in an engaging way. And like I said, I've been a freelance journalist covering a variety of topics for so long. I felt like, okay, I can navigate this world. I can enter this world of competition and professional athletics. But I do disclose a number of times in the book how new it is to me. And so if somebody's looking for, a comprehensive breakdown of, the sports itself, I get into the culture a little bit. I get into the different sensibilities when it comes to cannabis and sports, but mostly I rely on my sources, the people who have been in that world for years and years, really for their whole careers, and proudly admit myself. I mean, not proudly, I don't want to be a dick about it, but I'm like, this is not my world, this is not my wheelhouse, but I love running high, and I talk to a whole lot of other people that like working out high, and this is what they had to say.
Well, yeah, and you don't come across, as a dick even remotely. You really, I can sense, especially after reading your book, the compassion and empathy with which you wrote the book, because you were one of those people who was on the couch. I mean, you had a great work ethic. You have a great work ethic. You were a journalist and working very hard, but you also had all of the sort of accoutrements that come with being a journalist. You had that kind of Hemingway thing going on, right? Where you were drinking and smoking and, basically you had a funny passage about, you were sassily pressing the keyboard with some sassy journalism or something. I remember that word just is so perfect. The hardest thing I'd ever done to that point was being sassy on my computer or something. It was so funny. But, the point being that you were not the typical athlete who had been working out throughout middle school and junior high and high school. You were on the other side of the coin. And so for you to now be addicted to such a positive thing, running is really a strong statement to how cannabis can turn things around, or can kind of make your physiology actually enjoy it rather than it being painful or something that's boring. It really speaks to what is that chemically is happening in the body that makes you actually enjoy running.
Yeah, that was a really important theme for me to lean into in the narrative, particularly with the autobiographical stuff, because I thought my story appealed to the number of Americans, and quite a few, who don't like to exercise. I think something like 17% of Americans get sufficient exercise each week. And that's just sort of that's not athletics at all. That's not hitting the gym hard. That's going for a brisk walk and doing a little bit of push-ups each week. I really had no interest in that, and had these cultural assumptions about the kind of people who did it, the people that kicked my ass in high school, and just had a bad taste for that world. And what cannabis brought to that experience was a playfulness, in the moment pleasure for the activity itself. And I think for most people, they think of exercise as the pursuit of some end goal, weight loss, beauty, health, whatever it is. But I discovered through cannabis that it's its own reward, the running itself. There are rewards that come later, but you can pursue it just for the pleasure of the activity itself. And where that comes from is evolution. I think most people listening to this, people familiar with distance running, have heard of the book Born to Run, Christopher McDougall's book. I think it was 2003. There was a lot of research in there that showed humans have the physiology for running long distances greater than any other species, really. We're certainly not the fastest by far, but we have this incredible ability to run long distances. And evolutionary anthropologists believe this was so we could run down gazelles, or any other prey that we're trying to eat. And we certainly can't catch them, in short distances, but on hot days, we can wear them down with just a very moderate level of exercise. And I spoke to a lot of the people involved in that research and, followed them after that book came out, and they continued to research what it is that's going on an emotional and physiological level beyond just like having the great feet and knees and butt for running. We actually have these pleasure centers, these reward systems that incentivize certain behavior, and we have that with food, with salt, sugar, fat. There's a reason we're attracted to those things. They were rare at one point and our bodies needed them. Same thing with sleep, same thing with sex, same with learning. We get a little jolt, a little dopamine high from these things. And it's the same with exercise. We've sort of set that aside, over the last century. We still love the food and the sex and the sleep, but for some reason we don't get pleasure out of exercise, or at least a great deal of Americans seem not to, because they apparently hate it. And the research that was going on around the runner's high and the pleasure that can come from exercise showed that at running about 30 minutes or any kind of cardio at 30 minutes at 70% max heart rate will release this endogenous cannabinoid called anandamide. So we all have cannabinoids in us, just like there's THC and CBD in cannabis. We have endogenous cannabinoids, internal ones, just like we have an internal opioid called endorphins. And for a long time, people believed endorphins were responsible for the runner's high, and you still hear it today. There's a gym down the street here called Endorphins. And even on WebMD, they'll say like endorphins are responsible for the runner's high, but most of the research shows that it's not endorphins, it's anandamide, an endogenous cannabinoid, and it comes from the Sanskrit word for bliss. So, like I said, 30 minutes, 70% heart rate, you get a little uptick in mood, a little reduction in pain. And this was a mechanism that could incentivize running down gazelles, in the African savanna, like when you're so exhausted and you're full of so much pain, this can sort of transport you into an easier realm. And I often compare it to running as a child. When you're a kid and you go running across the playground, you're not really thinking about, like I said, beauty or health or fitness, or anything. You're just like, this is fun. Like, let's go run. And that's really the headspace that cannabis can put you in, and can take you out of, all of the ancillary chatter of like, do I look ugly? Are people laughing at me? Is this ridiculous? Am I getting old? Do I not run as well as I used to? Look at that person passing me, and just sort of myopically focus on the task itself, and the pleasure of the task itself. For running, it's a sort of meditative quality of the repetition of step, 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 and you can kind of drift away into a realm of bliss. And that has application beyond just recreational athletes looking to have a good time or incentivize themselves to exercise. It has a lot of applications for professional athletes as well. I spent a great deal of time with ultra marathon runners, being in Colorado, in Denver. We're right next to Boulder, which is sort of one of the capitals of endurance running in the world. And so speaking with a lot of them, what I hear again and again is that this is this endeavor of running for days and days. It's like 10% physical and 90% mental. So yes, you have to have the body to be able to handle those miles, but the real struggle, the real battle is in your head. You go a little crazy up there on the mountain after running for so long. You enter an almost like psychedelic realm, which can be euphoric or menacing, and you can lose your nerve. And you really need to stay confident. And I guess that's not just the case with endurance athletes. That's the case with, fighters or skiers, anyone who, is going to be a little intimidated by the task. A little puff of cannabis, and we can get into that later, a small dose can sort of like put all that away, and suddenly you're reminded why you got into it in the first place, what you originally loved about it. You know, if you make it your career, if you make anything your career, it's really easy to lose sight of why you got into it in the first place. And cannabis can sort of return people to that state of like, I love these trails, I love running, I love competing, I love being out here for days. This is my heaven. This is what I want to do. This is where I want to be. And so that's really just like one aspect of cannabis that has application for athletes. There are dozens.
You know, Josiah, what was popping in my head while you're talking is man's misery is in his or hers resistance to nature. That was just kind of what was popping into my head while you're talking, because we've had this beautiful symphony with nature since the beginning of time, where the species learn to live with each other. You know, the bacteria has an agreement. You know, it's the bacteria is not us. We're kind of like, they're letting us take them around, right? Like they're saying, okay, you can be our host. We'll let you be our host. And it's this, now that we, you know, endogenous being inside the body, cannabinoid system blew me away when I read that passage in your book, because I always thought it was the endorphins right up until I read that passage. And to know that the body manufactures its own cannabinoids is a way of letting you know that when we originally discovered the plant, we said, boy, this is like, we learned it and it learned us. And as long as we don't resist that, it's that beautiful high you talk about. It's only when we try to be separate from nature, and which, you know, I would theorize that that's just fear of death, right? Like the bigger picture is just we're terrified of death. And that's the resistance of death, is resisting nature. Somehow we can control it. we can be eternal, you know. And when I surrender to it and just take a deep breath and say, wow, you know what? I'm not going to resist anymore. I'm going to live in symphony, you know, live in concert with nature. You lose that. You're not the bully anymore. That bully that you referred to in your book, you know, that person who's trying to control, I can just outwork, you know, I can outwork it. I can outwork it, you know.
Yeah.
It's not playful.
Well, and I think that it also relates to pain, you know, in this era of pharmaceuticals, or really just like, you know, temperature controlled environments. You know, we're just surrounded by comforts that push away pain and discomfort. And what I got from endurance running was embracing pain, leaning into it. There's that phrase, the pain cave. And there's something, you know, from a neurological standpoint, pleasure and pain aren't wildly different. They activate a lot of the same regions of the brain, and there's a euphoria that comes after you embrace pain. People, you know, there's the Wim Hof cold weather exposure thing that's become so popular for good reason. You know, you do just get like this wild surge of all sorts of things after leaning into that pain. It's the same thing with running for hours and hours. And the interesting thing about cannabis and pain is registered in two different parts of the brain. There's two different things that are going on when we feel pain. You know, if my ankle's hurting, there's a part of my brain that just notices what's going on. Like, something's wrong with my ankle. It's talking to me right now. And I notice like I either push through it or I need to address it, whatever. But then there's the emotional side of like, holy shit, ow, this hurts. I want to scream. I want to punch something. And then the fear of like, oh no, is this injury flailing up again? Is my career over? Am I going to be able to finish this race? The anxiety around the pain. Cannabis doesn't change your noticing the pain, your acknowledgement of it, but it does change your emotional relationship to the pain. So you can still be aware of what's going on in your body, but not necessarily freak out about it. You can just be like, yep, there goes that ankle pain flaring up again. You know, I guess I've got to make a decision on what to do about that. But it's the same thing with like the anxiety of, you know, being a downhill skier or a base jumper or a rock climber, that it can change your relationship to those activities. And that's one of the reasons WADA wants it banned. It's one of the reasons they cite for it being banned is that it changes people's fear about past injuries in a variety of things, where when I read that, I was like, is that really a bad thing? Is that part of the spirit of the sport to have anxiety? But yeah, I agree with what you're saying about, connecting with nature and leaning into all of the different ways that we're integrated with nature, that our bodies are a part of nature, that there isn't really any separation between one another as humans, but also us and nature. And I think a lot of our anxiety and discomfort with modern life comes from that divorce that we have from the natural world. That's what I love about trail running. It's just one long commune with nature.
Yeah. The saying that I love, and it lives in me, and it was planted very deeply by a great Buddhist master here in Tampa, Michael Gregory, who actually I think is in San Diego now. Anyway, wonderful guy. I'll have to connect you with him. You'll really groove on him. But he said, dispassionate observation. And I thought those two words really are powerful to employ in my life. So like when you said, oh, there goes that knee again, the pain was there, but your relationship to it was different. And it was more of a neutral observation. And that can be applied, when my wife is saying something that might have in the past triggered something, I can say, oh, there's that subject again there's my stomach getting tight. Oh, there's something about being the observer. And I'm not saying we should all be like Spock and not feel emotion and not feel sadness and warmth and joy. That they're two separate subjects. It's changing the relationship to some of those negatives and kind of watching them. And cannabis is wonderful for that. I remember this one point, actually it might have been on psilocybe, I don't know, but it was either cannabis or psilocybe. And I saw this, what had traditionally been a subject that heated me up. And I was watching the mouth going like this. And I'm like, oh, she's framing the words. There's air coming out of the mouth. It's framing that word. Oh, and there's that word that used to make me do that. And all it was just air, and it was just a shape of it was such a disconnect, but in a positive way. It was like I was seeing the 32,000 foot view. It was like a change of perspective.
Yeah. And can you imagine if we applied that to something like politics, government policy, economics, like if we all just sort of like calmed down and looked at these problems, with that dispassionate observation of like, what is the best way to stimulate the economy? What is the proper tax code, and just got out of the, well, fuck that guy and what he believes, I'm just going to believe everything that's the opposite of him because I hate him. Or like you said, relationships as well. There's all sorts of ways that, in the psychedelic realm, or psychedelic culture, they talk about the default mode network that we all live in, where you're just sort of caught up in the routine of life and the routine of your thoughts that you've had for years and years. And it's just a well-worn groove in your brain. And the thing that psychedelics help is to, at least for a moment, take you out of that default mode network and just see all the possibility of perspective and feeling and approach and thinking to a whole manner of life obstacles. At the same time, I think the default mode network is helpful because you can't just live in that realm of infinite possibility. We do need to ground ourselves in some kind of tangible reality, if only for our own balance and sanity.
Yeah, key word there, balance. Yeah, because there's times to be grounded. I was at a yoga retreat in '94, and there was I never forgot it. A woman was talking to flowers, and she's in this sundress and talking to the flowers. I thought, oh, that's beautiful. I remember thinking that is so advanced. But then by like her fourth hour of talking to the flowers, I said, wow, it's getting pretty counterproductive. Like it started off as I thought she was way above me or way ahead of me. I was like, oh, what does she see? What does she know? I need to know, what is she seeing in the flower? And then by the fourth hour, I said, nah, she's just delusional. It's not, no great advanced. She's just seeing
we
things.
Can't completely absorb ourselves in plant life. Sometimes we do need to interact with other humans.
Yeah, at some point you've got to harvest them, right? Because you do need to ingest them at some point. So if you just keep talking to them and you don't eat them, you're gonna run into some issues
Right.
with you'll become catabolic, you know. Well, this is really fascinating. Let's shift over to sort of the physical benefits, because that was actually very remarkable when I was reading your book, Runner's High. One more time to remind everybody, if they're just tuning in, we're with Josiah Hesse, a very, very amazing investigative journalist, writing for Vice and been in a lot of the big journals. And I just want to say, well, obviously Denver Post, Esquire, Guardian. Before, in the middle, why don't we, if people want to, some people like to track while they're listening to a podcast. What is your website, Josiah, or the best way people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you're doing and some of your projects?
My website is josiahhesse.com. Twitter is a great way to stay in touch with me, at Josiah M. Hesse, through the middle initial in there. I don't know who got the
You
Josiah
say Hesse? Because I heard some people saying Hess at the conference.
Yeah, Hess is how it's pronounced in most of America. It's related to Hermann Hesse, the writer. In Germany, they say Hesse, but I'm from Iowa, and in the Midwest, we just do everything goofy. So we became Hesse for some inexplicable reason.
Okay.
So I don't take offense when people say Hess. It's kind of correct in a way. I'm not going to say like you need to say it the way we say it in Iowa. But yeah, it works either way.
Mike Tyson was at the conference, and I think he called you Hess, and I noticed you didn't correct him.
Mike Tyson did?
I'm just kidding. He was there. He was, I had a moment where I had to get them off stage. It was Mike Tyson, Daniel Carcillo, who was an enforcer for the Blackhawks, and Riley Cote, who was an enforcer for the Flyers. Mm-hmm. Each one of them had over 200 fights each. And Patrick's like, okay, you got to get him off the stage now. I said, all right, here we go. Unenviable task of telling those guys.
Right.
Yeah. So let's shift over to fighting, because that's my audience. Up till now, the people who are trying to suppress marijuana have had the upper hand. They've got that trope of the stoner on the couch with the pot belly and can't get motivated, eating Cheetos and watching Jerry Springer. But more and more athletes using cannabis, and there's a lot of people using cannabis in our space in fighting, MMA and boxing. There's even, I think you had referred to a group who roll high out in your neck of the wood, right? In the Southwest, high rollers. That must be the Diaz brothers, Nate and Nick and those guys, because are they involved in it? Do you know?
I'm not sure if they're involved in it. I can't say either way. I didn't speak with them. There was a Vice documentary, really great one, people can find online, about high rollers. There was so much to get into when it comes to the variety of avenues of sports that use cannabis, that I didn't really have the opportunity. I mean, I didn't even talk about rock climbing at all in the book, other than just mentioning rock climbers like it. I could have talked all day about CBD and how it helps, with the connective tissue in your hands that gets broken down with rock climbing. But with fighters, yes, it's very popular for a variety of reasons. I mean, pain is obviously a big part of fighting. And like I said earlier, cannabis can change your emotional relationship to the pain. So when you're in recovery, maybe you're not as emotionally disturbed by what's going on in your body, but can have a more calm observational approach to it. But with high rollers, they share a joint before rolling. So there's a kind of camaraderie aspect to it, which I think for a lot of people, they think of the world of fighting, thinking about Muhammad Ali, or just like any kind of trash talk that goes on. When you're training, you're looking at the photo of your competitor and, building up some kind of anger or hatred, or at least these are the ideas that we get in the media. I don't think it's always the case with fighters, but that's a trope that some people lean into. And with high rollers, they're sharing a blunt or a joint right before they go rolling. And so I think there's an interesting conversation that needs to be had in all manner of sports about competition and camaraderie. And do you have to hate your opponent, or can you feel challenged by them in a healthy way of like, well, look at, they're up here and I'm not quite at their level, so I'm going to work twice as hard to get, to them or past them. I think there could be something beautiful about competition if it's approached in the right way. And I think cannabis can facilitate that mindset. But also in recovery, beyond, like I said, the emotional tampering of pain, CBD has impacts on muscle spasticity. So, if you're broken down, you've been training hard, or you just were wrestling or, fighting in a way that's going to like really break down your muscles, CBD can be great for recovery. And then also for sleep, as we all know, sleep is essential to muscle recovery or any kind of physical recovery. So it's very appealing there. If you're looking to gain weight, if you're a bodybuilder, you're a boxer, you want to put on some pounds, cannabis is an excellent appetite stimulant. I talk to bodybuilders and they got to eat like 6 meals a day. Some of them got to get up in the middle of the night and pound some food, so, and then they're working out so hard that they get nauseous. I mean, some of them will puke, in the middle of a training session. So you're puking and yet you need to pound like 1,000 calories. Yeah, like you want an appetite stimulant in that, or when you're getting up in the middle of the night to eat a bunch of pasta, like a couple hits off a joint will really, get your stomach growling. So there's all sorts of ways that cannabis can be used for fighters. And that explains why it's wildly popular in MMA or, pro wrestling or boxing or a whole bunch. I mean, sorry to throw professional wrestling into the MMA and boxing world. I mean, I imagine that irks some people out there.
Now there's respect for pro wrestling amongst the MMA crowd. They're kind of the grand poobahs for learning, the drama, the trash talking, the having a personality, having a
Ken Shamrock. Went from MMA into pro wrestling. I'm not well versed on the modern MMA world, but when I was a teenager, I was really into the early UFC fights and was taking Taekwondo when I was in middle school, and was obsessed with Brandon Lee and Bruce Lee and that whole world. So yeah, I know about the Royce Gracie and Ken Shamrock fights.
Absolutely,
really loved that when I was a kid.
Oh yeah, that was kind of what got me into it too. All the Shamrock and Gracie and Don Fry and some of the originals. And you were talking about the pro wrestling. There are people who go back and forth. Brock Lesnar came over from WWE and became heavyweight champion at UFC and then went back again. Now he would get mauled because you have to be so well-rounded and you have to be such a hybrid and you have to be strong in every category. He would get mauled now, and he knows it. That's why he's staying in the WWE. But in the fight space, I wanted to ask you, has there been any research on CTEs, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, that fighters almost invariably suffer at some point as they get older? Has there been any research to any kind of therapeutic resolves with CBD or with cannabis?
Yes, there's been a variety. I don't think it's far enough along to speak with any absolute authority, but there's a lot of promising research that's showing that cannabis can act as a neuroprotectant against concussions and also against alcohol abuse, which is a fun little irony. But so yeah, for a lot of pro football players or fighters, cannabis is looking like it can protect against concussions and also repair damage done from concussions. And I believe the NFL and UFC are engaged in their own research or involved in different research going on around that very topic, because obviously, with all the discussion around concussions in pro sports and a lot of parents wondering, should I put my kid into football? that it's threatening their bottom line. It's threatening the existence of their sport. So if there's research showing that any kind of intervention can mitigate those harmful effects of the sport, yeah, they're definitely going to be interested. And the NFL certainly has the funds to put into that. And with the NFL, they're getting it's less and less now, but in decades previous, they were getting such a bad name for the amount of opioids being prescribed to athletes. Somebody's got a bad knee, well, let's just pump them full of oxycontin and send them back out onto the field. And there's all sorts of addiction problems that come with that, emotional problems, and then the injury itself. You're not really dealing with the injury; you're just numbing it. So it's certainly going to get a lot worse. You're not going to be able to give it the attention it needs. And I know I'm spiraling into a different topic here, but when people say, how can someone consume cannabis and then go out and play football or get into the octagon and do some MMA fighting? Well, if they're taking a lot of opioids and doing those things, they can certainly handle it with cannabis. If somebody can pop a bunch of oxycontin pills, which is essentially heroin, and go out and play the Super Bowl, then cannabis really isn't going to be a factor in that.
Right. Well, when you're mentioning how the UFC and the NFL are doing their own research on it, it makes sense. If you look at the CTE NFL Players Union settlement that they came upon, I can't remember what the final number was. It was in the billions. That gets expensive. But in a way, first, it forced the NFL to act. And of course, the UFC's acting, hoping to head off at the pass any kind of lawsuits down the road for them. But in a way, that players union settlement was an immunization, it was like a vaccination for the NFL. And then, okay, let's just get it over with. This was our big, 600-pound gorilla in the closet that no one talked about, was the brain damage. And, Junior Seau killing himself, and how many other NFL players killing people, no one talking about it. It had to come, to a head at some point. Now it's kind of, it's in the rearview mirror. Okay, we know what it does now. It's out, and, here's your money. Now let's move forward. And they try to make adjustments in the game, and UFC's trying to make those adjustments now. But in the end, it's a sport where you're trying to knock out your opponent. You're trying to render them unconscious. So, I don't see that ever changing, no matter what the UFC tries to do to alter their rules. It's hold on a second. Like a little monkey just came home. I'm going to shut my door.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
It's all good.
Yeah, school's out. So anyway, if there's anything that can mitigate the damage, or dare I say prevent it, and it's just natural and just, it can't be patented, it can't be kept from you, and it has to be done, with its cofactors. It has to be done as a whole substance. Why wouldn't you? Like, who would fight that?
Mm-hmm. Well, the World Anti-Doping Agency is one who will fight that, and the leagues as well, the NFL, the MLB, the NBA, they all had very draconian restrictions around cannabis. It could really ruin your career if you were caught, and nearly did on a number of levels. I mean, Michael Phelps, he didn't have it too bad. There was more of just like a public scandal. He lost a Kellogg sponsor, I think, and was suspended from competing for like 6 months or something. But still, it was in the news. It was a big deal. And it's fascinating, the inconsistencies in the justification for its ban. WADA has 3 different criteria for why they ban any substance. 1, it's a performance enhancing drug, so it'll give you an unfair advantage over the competition. 2, it's unhealthy, it's harmful to the body. And 3, it violates the spirit of the sport, which is obviously a pretty nebulous term, which they admit is difficult to define. And cannabis, you can't say it's going to take you beyond your natural limits the way steroids or blood doping will. We all have these genetic limits, and sometimes steroids can, make your muscles swell and make your body function beyond those genetic limitations. Cannabis doesn't do that. So it's not really a performance enhancing drug in that way. In terms of its harm, perhaps there are things about it that are unhealthy, but we allow opioids, we allow ibuprofen, which dehydrates you, which is hard on the stomach. We allow SSRIs, or all sorts of antidepressants. There's a variety of things that are much more harmful than cannabis that are not banned. But the violation of the spirit of the sport is what they're kind of clinging to with this. And in a 2011 paper that WADA collaborated on, the National Institute for Drug Abuse, they said that athletes are role models for children. And so them using cannabis would set a bad example for children. And so that essentially is the justification for its ban. Kids will get the wrong idea. And it's not a small thing, because that affects their bottom line. So much of the commerce around sports is wrapped up in it being family friendly, a family ritual, going out to the games or watching them at home, especially around the holidays. And so much of the sponsorship dollars are wrapped up in you being able to make this a family friendly activity. For some reason, alcohol isn't problematic in this realm. I mean, as I'm speaking to you, I'm about a mile away from Coors Field, where our baseball team plays, and alcohol's loaded up in every sport, including distance running. And so really it's that kind of war on drugs sensibility that is driving a lot of the cannabis prohibitions in sports. It's the idea that cannabis will make you lazy, it will make you uncoordinated, it will make you want to eat terrible food. And they see this as in conflict with the identity of an athlete. But on that one point, the idea that athletes are role models for children, I mean, I don't want to talk shit about athletes, but when I read David Goggins' book. He's a ultramarathon runner. He's a Navy SEAL. He's a fascinating guy. I really loved his book. I follow him on Instagram. I think he's fascinating. But he talks about running with broken legs that he duct taped together. He'll run until his kidneys shut down and he's pissing red glue, and he's hospitalized. And I hear these stories from ultra runners all the time. I'm throwing up blood, and my ankle popped out of joint, my ribs separated. And to me, this reads like a Keith Richards or Guns N' Roses biography, them staying up for days on coke and booze. It's a sort of hedonistic lifestyle. And I don't understand why that should be seen as a role model for children. I mean, exercise is good. We should encourage children to exercise. But when you're at an elite level, you're punishing your body on a daily basis. And everyone should, have the freedom to do it. I do it with distance running. I ran a 50K last April, and that just beat the hell out of my body. And that was with a 4,000 feet climb. It was in the Rocky Mountains. And so, but I consider that like a bender, I went out on a running bender for 8.5 hours, I couldn't stop, and so the idea that I should encourage my 12-year-old nephew to follow in my footsteps and run for 8.5 hours until you nearly die. No, I don't think that's a good idea.
You said it at some point in the book, it's the yin and yang, the yin of, balancing ambition with playfulness. Yeah. And it always comes back to the balance, and the body lives in a state of balance, right? It's acid, alkaline balance, and, all the different things that people might normally look at as bad. Virus. So virus isn't necessarily bad. Now they're discovering how to deliver anti-cancer molecules inside a virus, sort of as a Trojan horse to get around the cancer, because the cancer puts the biofilm around itself. So the immune system doesn't recognize it. So now they've figured out how to get around that biofilm, the cancer masquerading as part of your body through virus, which used to be the bad guy. So, it's that living in concert and the whole thing of banning cannabis or cannabinoids just seems so ridiculous when I read that passage in your book that our bodies make its own cannabinoids. So how crazy is it, something that the body has evolved in such a positive resource to ban, exogenous cannabinoids to help supplement something that's already natural and in the body?
Yeah, and there was a real resistance to research around the endocannabinoid system throughout medicine. This was something that was discovered, I believe, in the 70s. Raphael Mechoulam and some others, it wasn't just him, really discovered that it's not just anandamide that our body produces. We have a whole host of endogenous cannabinoids and receptors in the brain and throughout the body. And these are involved in really everything, nearly everything that goes on. They regulate, not exclusively, but in concert with other systems, sleep, appetite, mood, fertility, immune system, nearly everything that goes on in the body. And what was interesting in the book is Mechoulam, who is kind of the godfather, the pioneer of cannabis research. When he first started researching cannabis, the National Institute of Health said, "Why do you want to research that? Nobody uses cannabis." This was in 1962. And they thought it was irrelevant. They didn't even want to fund or approve his study. And then by the 90s, they came out with research that said the endocannabinoid system is involved in nearly all human diseases. And so, yeah, it's pretty important, wouldn't you say, in medicine? And yet there was a survey, I think in the late 2000s, early 2010s, that showed 9% of medical schools are teaching the endocannabinoid system. Now, that's changed a lot since then. It's much more prevalent now. It's being researched and taught in medical schools, to a much greater degree than it was then. But for so long, we just weren't studying this system because of the stigma around cannabis. There was just, nobody wanted to stick their head up and say like, oh, I'll brand myself with this topic. I'll make this the cornerstone of my career. There were a handful of people, and now they're, sitting pretty because there's so much research going on about this. But for so long, it was taboo just because they thought they'd be viewed like a hippie, not even for studying phytocannabinoids, which is THC and CBD, the cannabinoids in the plants, but just for studying what's going on in our bodies with endocannabinoids. And I think that's also reflected in WADA. Things are slowly progressing where we're calming down and not getting so embarrassed by talking about cannabis or cannabinoids, and can just do the research, acknowledge what's going on in the body and progress and learn how this magical plant can benefit our lives.
There's another way it benefits our lives, and this one blew my mind. You cited some research from Angela Bryan, University of Colorado, Boulder, where it says if you look at data of long-term cannabis users, you see that they have lower body mass index, a better waist to hip ratio, lower rates of diabetes. And this next one is huge because so much of disease revolves around inflammation, better insulin function. You go on to add that subsequent studies have also revealed that cannabis users are 10% less likely to get cancer and have lower mortality rates when experiencing heart failure than their sober counterparts. Just this alone, when you look at the pandemic of inflammation, and like just to visit COVID for one quick second, it was everybody who had diabetes, it was everybody who was inflamed, it was everybody who had that weren't sensitive and had, they had bad insulin, they were not sensitive to their insulin. That just on that alone, why you would resist this. I mean, that was really powerful.
Yeah, and that flies in the face of a lot of assumptions we have about cannabis users. Like I said, that lazy stoner stereotype. When cannabis was first legalized in Colorado, and there was in 2012, and it wasn't going to come online until 2014, our governor, John Hickenlooper, said, like, don't break out the Cheetos and Goldfish crackers just yet. And there were so many comments about like that. There's this assumption that cannabis users eat shitty food and don't exercise. And Angela Bryan's research shows that that's just not the case. In one of her early studies on this topic, she did a survey really just looking at the exercise habits of people focused on legalized states. They added the cannabis question, and then they're like, okay, let's just focus on Oregon, California, Colorado, and let's see what the exercise habits are of people out there, and let's throw a couple cannabis questions in there. She found that 80% of respondents said they used cannabis before, during, or after their workout. And that got a lot of media attention because it just flew in the face of these assumptions that cannabis users are unhealthy. And so, yeah, it can have a number of benefits, and it's not really clear if like cannabis provides those functions. If it does, lower your obesity or heart disease or cancer likelihood, or if there's something about cannabis that changes your approach to food or to exercise or to stress, which then has impacts on a lot of those ailments. But we at least need to get rid of this idea that cannabis users are unhealthy, or that if somebody starts using cannabis, it means that their health is going to take a dark turn. And the funny thing about Angela Bryan, she's a wonderful person and does some amazing research. I participated in one of her studies. I talk about it in the book. She got into this topic thinking that the legalization of cannabis would reduce the amount of exercise people are getting. She's a, I believe, behavioral anthropologist, if I have that right, something along those lines. And she was researching for years why people don't exercise. And so when cannabis legalization hit, she was like, oh no, is this going to have this detrimental impact on the amount of exercise people are getting? And that's when she started doing these surveys and found just the opposite. And then she became a convert to cannabis. She talks in this NPR podcast about how when she had this surgery, she didn't use any opioids. She just used cannabis edibles, and it was a much easier thing to wean herself off of, rather than oxycodone. So yeah, we are definitely in the middle of a huge culture shift around this topic, particularly in relation to health. And one more thing, I think that's the reason why older Americans are the fastest growing demographic of cannabis users, because it impacts your ability to, aging impacts your ability to exercise a lot of the time. Things hurt more, and you don't want to move as much when you get all that pain and inflammation. Well, cannabis can be a game changer in that. And Angela's research shows that a lot of people are exercising more. A lot of older Americans are re-engaged with exercise by using cannabis as a supplement for the activity.
You had mentioned Angela's operation, and so many people getting operations. One of the things that I noticed in my own research was the anesthesia that you have to subject yourself to for an operation is actually brain damaging. And post-op medications, like you said, like the oxycodones and the pain meds, also very, very bad for the brain. It's funny, I had a headache about a week ago, and she was trying to give me a couple of Tylenols, and I said, you know what? Let me go take a look. Let me research that. I'm going to go do a gummy, because neuroprotective versus neuro damage. Just on that alone, again, there's just so many easy calls. Like, to me, it's just an easy call. Do I want to do something that research is starting to reveal brain damaging, or research is revealing neuroprotective? So for me, that it's another one of those kind of no-brainers. Here's a kind of a selfish question. Does cannabis help with mental performance in any way, and concentration and focus? Because that would be another element that would kind of fly in the face of the stereotype, of kind of fogging out, and just kind of being, hey, dude, where's my car? Like, that would kind of fly in the face if there's any kind of research that's demonstrating it. Because if it's neuroprotective, can you make the leap that it actually helps in any way with focus or cognition?
Well, the research is mixed on that. In my experience and the people I spoke with, the conclusion that I come to, I say this again and again in the book, is don't try new things stoned. I think it can facilitate greater concentration in in activities that you already understand. If I went rock climbing for the first time about a month ago as an indoor gym, and I got a little bit of fear of heights, and I've never put on like rock climbing shoes, never used one of those auto belay things. And so the experience was pretty intimidating. I did not get high before that. I was with a bunch of rock climbers who, smoked a blunt in the car before they went in and had a great time. I'm not going to do that when I'm trying something new. But for things that I already have a implicit memory with, like riding my bike or running trails, it can increase the sort of myopic focus on that task itself. I hear this from trail runners when it comes to running downhill. For anyone who's ran a trail downhill, things are coming at you so fast. I had a late night run with a friend who was a much better runner than me on a very rocky trail the other night, and we had headlamps on, and it's just like a tiny little circle of light that you have to pay really close attention to. And to do that, you need to like shut everything out and just be like, there's a rock, there's a hole, there's a tree root, and you're just bam, bam, bam. And when you're leaning into that downhill, things come at you so fast that you don't really, it's one of those things that you have to like turn off part of your brain. Like if you think about it too much, you're gonna mess yourself up. And I hear that with downhill skiers as well, that they need to shut everything out and just focus on the slaloming, I'll admit, like I've never been a skier, so I don't know all the terms, but there's a lot of things coming at you with downhill skiing that you need to just like be bam, 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 focused on. And so I think that's why, people say like, how could you play a professional football game when you're stoned? Well, these people have been playing football since they were like 6 years old. They understand what that ball feels like. They understand the rules of the game. They understand the strategy. And so if they're getting really high beforehand, they're just going to have like this supreme focus on where is that ball, where's the hole to get through. Again, I don't know all the terminology for professional football, but I hear it with bodybuilders as well. Like they're just tuned into the curl of the bicep, and they can feel all the muscles, all the tendons, everything that's in their hand, and just all that exists is that arm and that weight and the movement itself. So that's a long-winded way of saying if you already know how to do something, yes, it can increase your focus. If you're trying to learn something for the first time, I do not recommend cannabis.
Very good answer. Thank you for that. That's an important distinction. I appreciate that. Another selfish question, and this regards, I'm trying to become metabolically flexible in my nutrition. Several of my friends have been longtime ketone burners and are really trying to lobby me to switch over. I've traditionally been kind of in the vegetarian space. And I find it extremely easy to build muscle as a vegetarian. I always crack up when people say, how do you build muscle as a vegetarian? I'm like, dude, that's the easiest category to build muscle because your insulin is so freaking high all the time. It's easy to put on muscle. Don't like that. The hard part is put on, for me, well, first off, the hard part is coming over to becoming a ketone burner, a fat burner, as opposed to, a glucose burner. That's really hard for me to do. But the people who I know to come over, they say, yeah, you're going to flatten out. You're going to flatten out as a ketone person. But the evidence is becoming pretty compelling that your brain burns a lot more cleanly on the ketones rather than sugar, sort of likening it to the flame on a candle is nice and steady. It never goes up and never goes down and will last 10 times longer. So the candle being the ketones, whereas a big pile of newspapers, you get a big poof, right? A big flame, and then it's out, and then you got to do it all over again. So that would be, carbs. So my selfish question is there any information or data or research pointing to benefits with cannabis in helping to, there's a kind of a bonk. There's like for me, there's a 3-day bonk I can't get past when it's trying to make the shift. I don't have any sugar left. And I almost feel like I'm a drug addict getting off something with the sweats and the nausea. And I feel catabolic, which psychologically is really hard for me because I'm a hard gainer. So it's a really hard, I've never been able to do it. I've been trying for 2 years because I have so many people who say, when you come over, dude, and when you're a ketone burner, you're going to be like Einstein. You got to do it. You got to come over. It's going to help your brain. Is there any protocols for me that cannabis might help in that transition?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Damn it.
I mean, from a dietary standpoint, I know that cannabis is rich in a lot of nutrients and proteins. And for me personally, I like to make my own edibles, and I like to use the plant itself. I have this thing, it's called a decarboxylator, which is the process that cannabis goes through when you're making edibles. It starts with THCA, and it removes the acid molecule, becomes THC. You have to heat it up. That's why you heat it up when you smoke it, or you have to cook it. You can't just eat raw flour. It's not going to do anything for it. I mean, there'll be nutrients in there, but it's not going to have any sort of intoxicating effect. So this little oven I have, this decarboxylator, will cook the cannabis, and then it comes out as like this brown substance. It doesn't taste terribly good, but you mix it in with some peanut butter or something, put it in a smoothie, and you don't really taste it. I'm getting a whole variety of not just cannabinoids, but nutrients through that. That I think is really lost on most products, most edibles that you would buy in a dispensary. They just go through such a refinement process of extracting the THC and the CBD and putting that into a gummy or a cookie or something that I think in years ahead, there'll be research showing that there's so much going on in that plant that if you can just eat it, the whole thing, even though it's cooked, you're getting so much more out of it than just eating the gummies.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it sounds like it would be anabolic just in the fact that it has so much nutrition. So I'm wondering, I mean, for all the other reasons we've already highlighted it, I've already rotated it into my schedule. I now ingest, but I'm wondering just where and how and when to apply it in terms of some of my intermittent fasting protocol. Is there any kind of intersection there that I should know about, or we should know about with fasting and, the benefits of intermittent fasting or timed feeding?
Not that I'm aware of, but keep in mind that cannabis is an appetite stimulant. So if you're trying to fast, it's something that's going to make it very difficult. Although, so there's a recent development with a big edible company called Wana out of Colorado. They have these new line of gummies called Wana Fit, which have THCV in them. And there's a bunch of science that I don't understand well enough to get into what THCV is. But I know that with these gummies, they provide the energy that I love so much from THC and the passion that I get from THC when I'm out running. But they're also an appetite suppressant, which they didn't tell me when they first sent me these gummies. I was out running and I'm like, I love these. I'm having a great run, and then afterwards I'm like, where's my appetite? Usually I'm just, I want a giant thick smoothie after I'm done running, but now I just don't want anything. And that happened a couple of times. And then I got on the phone with someone from WADA, and they're like, yeah, they're an appetite suppressant. And I'm like, okay, I get the appeal of that, from the market. Maybe I'll take them if I'm fasting. But when I'm out running and I've just tackled, 10, 20 miles on a trail, I want a big ass meal after that. I'm ravenous. And so I don't want any of that appetite suppressant after getting all of that cardio. But I could definitely see the appeal for people who are, just getting into exercise, or people who want to cut weight, that there's now cannabis products out there that not only won't stimulate your appetite, but will help you suppress your appetite, which is amazing. I just love it.
It's amazing. That that's like the versatility of the
Mhm.
substance. There's some wonderful stories and testimonies in the book as well about body transformation, uh,
Mhm.
physical transformation, spiritual transformation, emotional transformation, mental transformation. One stuck out in my mind. I guess it was in a class. Couldn't tell what kind of class, but I love the name of the class, Mary Jane Fonda.
Yeah. Isn't that
Mary
great?
Jane Fonda class. Apparently, there's a woman who got out of a wheelchair. Do you remember the details of that story and lost 100 pounds?
Yeah, yeah, that was Janessa Leah. Different from the Mary Jane Fonda. Janessa was actually the one who took me rock climbing a month ago and was smoking a blunt with her partner beforehand. Um, she's just an amazing character as from a journalism standpoint, but also as just an amazing human. She had what's called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a hyperelasticity in the joints. Well, it's an elasticity throughout the body, but it created such huge pain for her in her joints because most people aren't flexible enough. They get tight in their muscles or tight in their tendons. I certainly do after running the trails. She had the exact opposite problem where everything's too loose. Things are popping out of joint, which, as you could imagine, is profoundly painful. And she became obese, stuck in a wheelchair, and was on a lot of pharmaceuticals, antidepressants, opioids, benzodiazepines, amphetamines, a whole lot of stuff that was just making her absolutely miserable. She wanted to die. She talks about in the interview just being stuck in this wheelchair full of pain. I want to die. And she got into Rick Simpson oil, which is a very potent form of cannabis, high in CBD that a lot of cancer patients use. And she was using a profoundly large amount of it. I think it was something like 1,000 milligrams of THC or something a day. But certainly had the justification for that. And when you compare that with like the oxycontin and Xanax and Adderall that she was on, give her all the cannabis in the world. She got out of her wheelchair. She started doing pool exercises, because that's all she could do. She was in such pain. She'd go into a pool, that you get those floaty weights that you like push down into the water. There's a little bit of resistance there. She worked her way up from that level of a workout to, running half marathons and working out every day. She became a fitness instructor. She had her own cannabis gym for a while, and that was an interesting story how that got shut down. There's all sorts of politics about cannabis events in Colorado and where the legal lines are drawn. But yeah, she's still doing it. I forget exactly what her Instagram handle is, but if you Google Janessa Leah, you can find her out there. She's doing some really great stuff now. And she talks in the book about how it was her daughter, really, she was a single mom, her daughter that kept her from just killing herself as she really wanted to. And it was her daughter that pushed her to get this higher quality of life and be able to show up as a parent, but then also just have a higher quality of life for herself. I mean, she's now just active and full of, vibrant life. And it's just amazing the transformation her body went through, through the Rick Simpson oil.
Rick Simpson oil. I'm gonna have to look into that. It sounds like it's very efficacious and powerful, which is what I want.
Yeah.
All right, if you're comfortable, tell us. That I think one of the big things to always remind everybody is everything has to do with dose. Everything has to do with, if you're going to go heavy, making sure you have a babysitter or someone who can, almost like designated driver, right? Like you want someone who can kind of keep an eye on you, especially if you're a newbie at this. And you have a very funny story about a carrot cake and dose issues. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I have a number of stories of messing up my doses.
It's the reason. Plenty of stories.
It's the reason I was convinced to write the how-to chapter. I didn't want to because I don't like telling people what to do. I don't want to be a guru that's starting some big movement. But yeah, there's some helpful tips that I could have benefited from in my early days when I went out to Humboldt County for the first time, and never taken edibles before. Been smoking for a couple of years at that point, so I was comfortable with it. We made some sugar trim edibles, some carrot cake, and just weren't really paying attention to how much trim we're putting in there. Certainly couldn't measure the THC content. Didn't have the tools for that or the knowledge to do that, and we just threw it in there. And then also, I wasn't paying attention to how much I was eating. I was on vacation. I was seeing some friends. We were having some beers, smoking some weed. We ate the one edible early on, and I was getting high. And I was like, "Man, that was tasty. Let's. I'm gonna have another slice of that. Let's take it to 11." And I really lost it. They took me to some party on a farm, and there was a band, and I jumped on the stage and was insulting people and took my shirt off, and everyone was just weirded out. And I ran into a cornfield, and they couldn't find me. Eventually, they literally locked me in the van. They're like, "Just stay in the van until this party's over, then we'll take you home." And then I wound up sleeping for days after that. I mean, I wasn't in any real medical danger, but like it ruined my vacation. They woke me up and said, "You have to get on the plane to go back home." And they said they drove me to the airport and felt concerned about me because they kind of had to like literally push me out of the van and be like, "All right, here's your ticket, here's your suitcase, get on the plane." And I was just like, where? That was my vacation. And then also a similar thing happened when I first got into running trails. I'd been running in the city for a long time, and then friends took me up to the trails in the Rocky Mountains, and I was like, "This is so fun. I'm just going to run." And I ran past them. I was just sprinting. I was burning all of the calories in my stomach, getting into that high heart rate. And so I found myself like 10 miles in being like, I haven't paid attention to any of these signs, on the trails. The trails splinter off all over the place. I haven't been watching any of that. I'm now starving. I didn't bring any food. I didn't bring any water, and I have no idea where my friends are. And it was an absolute disaster. So things like that, like I said earlier, don't learn new things when you're high. That includes running trails. If you've always ran in the city or in parks, and so your first time in the trails, don't take a lot of cannabis and just go, gazelling up the mountain without paying attention to anything. I always encourage people when they're new to cannabis. There's a phrase in Colorado: start low and go slow. Start with a low dose and wait. Wait an hour. Probably won't take that long to kick in, but just to be safe, wait an hour. Take like 5 milligrams and be at home where you don't have the responsibilities. You got a babysitter, or that you've already walked the dog. Turn your phone off. And have some mindfulness. Be like, how do I feel right now? Do I feel anxious? Do I feel sleepy? Do I feel jolly and giggly? And get your consciousness accustomed to that sensation before you combine it with anything, including exercise. And then start low with exercise as well. If you haven't done it in a long time, go for a walk in the park, do some light stretching. On YouTube, there's all sorts of like aerobics for beginners, yoga for beginners. Do something very gentle and ease yourself into both of these things, both the cannabis and the exercise. And don't do like Maureen Dowd did and come to Denver having no idea what the dosage is of these edibles. And she ate the whole fucking candy bar, which was like 10 times what she should have eaten. And then she writes this column of like, I was terrified. I thought I was going to die. I thought the police were coming for me. Things are terrible in Colorado. These edibles are a nightmare. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, if say you'd never had alcohol before, and there was a way to like discreetly take it like you can cannabis without knowing how much you're taking, and someone just drinks like 5 glasses of Everclear and like throws up everywhere and gets their stomach pumped at the hospital, and they're like, well, no more alcohol for me. Look what alcohol does. We're like, well, maybe you should have a beer or a glass of wine. Ease yourself into it. And it's the same thing with cannabis. People are just taking way too much and having these terrible experiences and being like, well, that's what cannabis is. That's what cannabis does. I don't want any more of that. Well, if you took like 1/10 of what you took, it's a whole different ballgame.
I thought that was funny when Maureen Dowd was saying, I'm on the bed and I was dead, but I was upset that no one was telling me I was dead. Just that conversation is just so funny to me. Like the fact that you're having a conversation with yourself. So that would tell you right there, you're not dead, but she was convinced she was dead. And she was really mad at people because they wouldn't tell her she was dead. The other funny, yeah, go ahead.
I speak with a lot of ER doctors in Colorado, or I did for a story years ago, and they were having a surge of people showing up complaining about cannabis. And this wasn't the case when I talked to an ER doctor in California in Marin County, this guy who'd been working for like 40 years in emergency medicine in California. He's like, I saw like 9 people in 40 years who were complaining about cannabis, but somehow in Colorado, we're getting, 100 of them a day showing up to ERs. Or hundreds. And really, it came down to the Maureen Dowd story. Tourists coming to Colorado, having no idea how to use cannabis. They don't know anyone else who knows how to use it, that can talk them down and be like, no, you're not dying. Maybe you're uncomfortable right now. It'll pass. Chill out. Here's a blanket. Here's a TV. Wait it out. You'll be fine. No, they take way too much and they think they're dying. And they show up to the ER. I'm dying. And these ER doctors are like, we reassure them that they're not dying. This is the medical practice that we're giving them. We reassure them, and then we hydrate them. We monitor them, and you could just stay home and save yourself a pretty hefty medical bill. And you could do a little bit of research beforehand, and don't eat the whole damn candy bar. Right. Eat a little piece of it or a half a piece.
Difference in dose, as you said, the difference of getting a really nice buzz, just a really nice, reflective, contemplative high, where you're in your own world and feeling great and having some great thoughts and some ideas for your business and brain's working well. And everything just feels good, versus anxiety and paranoia and lethargy is just dose dependent. So that, having it be legal and regulated, so that, like, as you also said in your book, you love being able to know the exact doses with the gummies. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to try to do the weighing. You don't have to just hope you're getting it right. No, it's right there on the pack. And so you just learn, and it's just, you learn how to do it. And now it's like anything. It's balance and dose dependent and, taking it slow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to that, delicate balance of yin and yang. It's don't go too far in any one direction. I'll give you a quick little CBD story. Oh, wait, I also wanted to say one of the things that gave me a chuckle was the specificity of why you jumped on the stage with this jam band. You even said the band, they were playing Steely Dan, and that's not how you play Steely Dan. The resident expert on Steely Dan. That was just so funny. That's not how you play Steely Dan. I'm going to show you how to play. First, let me take my shirt off so I can show you how to play Steely Dan.
And that's the logic of someone who's had way too many edibles.
Exactly. Here's my CBD story. I'm in Stuttgart doing a fight, and I'm getting ready to come home. And sometimes, body clock thrown off. It's a 4-day fight. You're coming across 6 or 7 time zones for just 3 days. So you never really get to adjust your time clock. The jet lag never really leaves. And so I'm kind of messed up. I'm getting ready to come home, and my face just looked like a catcher's mitt, really dry. I think I wasn't hydrated. And I was desperate for some oil. There was no body lotion in the hotel. Not that I would put that on anyway with all the chemicals, but I was desperate for like some aloe or something for my face. Couldn't find anything. And then I realized, oh, wait, I have a bottle of CBD in my suitcase. So it was I don't know what the oil was, but it was a moisturizer. It was going to be better than what my face was. I could tell you that much. So I slathered it all over my face, and it kind of helped. And went to the airport, got in the immigration passport line at the Stuttgart airport. There's like 500 people, those big long winding, you got to walk all the way this way, then turn and come all the way back again and all the way back again. There's only like 4 passport officers. Well, all of a sudden these badass German cops, look more like paramilitary, come into the room. There's maybe 3 or 4 of them. They have the machine guns. they've got the look. And they had these German shepherds, just nasty looking, like kind of pulling at the leash type of German shepherds. I'm like, I can remember thinking to myself, boy, that's not a good look for your tourism. Very, very intimidating. And they started having the dogs sniff all the suitcases and sniff the people. And clearly they were drug dogs. And I'm in line, I'm feeling fine. And they get about 5 people away from me, and the dogs start going nuts. They start looking up at me, going, pulling on leash. And I'm like, oh, there must be some dude around me, must have drugs, right? Something's going on. Must be that. I kind of start looking at the guy down this way, like we're in a lineup, and it's got to be this guy. Well, maybe it's this guy, So anyway, the dogs come up to me and start jumping up and trying to get at me. And I'm like, well, the cops are holding them, of course. And this is a little bit mortifying, like this wild scene here in Germany. And everyone starts looking at me like, oh, what did this guy do wrong? And I couldn't tell. And they're trying to get at my face. Cops pull me out of the line. They put me in the special room, and 2 or 3 other guys in there who look like dirt bags. And we're in the room waiting and waiting and waiting. Finally, one dude kind of opens one of the other doors, and it's baggage. It's outside baggage. He looks around and just goes, I'm out of here. And he leaves. And so we all eventually, after we waited for about a half an hour, we eventually just went into baggage. But the CBD. So note to self, be careful in Germany. Yeah. I don't know what they would have done if they would have taken me off the flight. I don't know what, but we got out of that room and got our bags and got out of Dodge. It was pretty wild.
Well, Germany's legalizing cannabis now.
Are they?
That news just broke a week or 2 ago. I don't know what the timeline is for them implementing it. These things always take a long while if they even happen. Like what we saw in Washington D.C. But yeah, Malta also, I just heard yesterday, is legalizing cannabis. So it's starting to hit Europe, and then Israel as well. So if it makes it to some of the English-speaking countries, I might move over there and get a job in journalism.
Yeah, it's so beautiful over there. I'm very lucky. I get to go there quite a bit. And Eastern Europe is awesome. Although I was not the smartest of I brought some psilocybe, but in pill form, with me to Turkey once. And I can remember walking around the hotel talking to everybody. I'm a real chatty Cathy on psilocybe, and I was just talking to everybody. And then I talked to someone, and they said, "You never watched Midnight Express, dude?" I don't know if you ever watched Midnight Express. It's a dude who has some kind of drugs with him. He's in Turkey, and he gets arrested, and it's Turkish law, and they put him in jail for like 30 years. It's based on a true story on drugs. God. Yeah, and it's brutal. Like you do not want to be in jail in Turkey. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a real rocket scientist with the psilocybe, and in Istanbul, Turkey, not the smartest moves.
Right.
And when my wife sees this show, she's going to be real thrilled at that part, because she doesn't know that yet. Well, I've been really greedy with your time. Did I leave anything out? Was there anything you wanted to make sure we touched upon?
I don't think so. I think we covered quite a bit in this segment. I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had this beautiful passage that I'd like to read before we go, that says that this is you. Ultimately, this is not necessarily a book about weed or even running. It's about a perspective shift on the whole concept of exercise. It's about engaging our evolutionary reward system. This is inside the body, to make exercise as pleasurable as food or sex, and about how cannabis can help jumpstart those long dormant mechanisms. That's so well written, Josiah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the book is such a treat. I really can't exaggerate how much I enjoyed reading it. One more time, it's Runner's High, which I find so ironic that it does the psychedelic thing. Oh, look at that. It does the psychedelic thing. Don't adjust your screen at home, folks. It's just my green screen. But there it is right there. Pick it up. Where can they get that? In all the regular places like Amazon? Where can they pick up the book if they're interested in reading this?
Really anywhere. Just don't get it confused with Dean Karnazes' memoir that came out like 6 months before this, which is also called Runner's High. I think his is called A Runner's High, and mine's just Runner's High.
Did you know that someone else had that title? Because it's the perfect. I mean, you can't do any better as a title than that, right?
I agree. Yeah, there was no conversation about what the title should be. That was it from conception. Wow.
Well, we've been visiting with Josiah Hesse, freelance journalist in Denver, writing on all other subjects too. You have a book on, it's a psychological horror thriller. What's the name of that book?
It's a series called Carnality. It's a psychological horror about evangelicals.
Oh my God, that's going to be, I think we all can relate to that. We've all been, sure. I grew up Catholic, so I've had, I can remember the distinct time when I came home and my knuckles were red from a ruler. And that's when my mom took me out of the Catholic schools.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Getting hit on the knuckles because the teacher was so boring. I couldn't sit still. And I needed the, what's that, school? There's a really good, I can't remember it offhand. It's the Montessori. I needed the Montessori. I needed to get up. I needed to touch. I needed to move my body. That's how I needed to learn. I didn't need to get hit on the knuckles with a wood stick. That didn't help me learn at all.
Yeah, it doesn't help anybody.
Doesn't help. Featured in The Guardian, Vice, Politico, High Times, and the Denver Post. You could also check him out. He's the senior editor of the Denver Arts and Literature magazine, Suspect Press. Thanks once again for a wonderful visit, Josiah.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.
Talk to you soon, brother.
For our full schedule of fights on the NBC Sports Network, CW and ABC affiliates, visit UnitedFightAlliance.com. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify and Amazon Music. United Fight Alliance, for the fighter in you.